Hello, everybody. I'm James Taylor, the Public Affairs Specialist in the Hyattsville Library Branch of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, PGCMLS, in charge of the Prince George's Room. Today, we'll be doing an oral interview program on the life of Raye Montague, the woman who revolutionized naval engineering. To achieve this, I have with me Dr. David Montague and Paige. Dr. David Montague, the son of Raye Montague, is the Executive Director of Online Learning and Faculty Mentoring at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Paige is a news and features writer, as well as the author of The General's Niece. So together, David and Paige authored The Overnight Code, which tells the story of Raye Montague, David's mother, an ambitious African-American woman from segregated Little Rock, Arkansas. I will be posing questions to both David and Paige on the life of Raye Montague. Welcome to the program, David and Paige.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Can you briefly introduce Raye Montague, your mother, to us, David?
Sure. My mother, Raye, was a product of the segregated South, the Jim Crow era. She grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas right now. And she endeavored to do something that was really different for a lot of folks. And she wanted to become a naval engineer, and she learned at a very early age. And she was able to make her dream come true. And in doing so, along that journey of achieving her dream, she was able to really help the United States as a whole, and as well as help be part of revolutionizing the entire industry in terms of computer-aided design and manufacturing. And at the same time, made it her point to use every opportunity that she received to give back to others and inspire others. And she did that until she passed in 2018.
She lived an awesome life. Thank you, David. When going through the book, I realized that she was a woman of respect, and she urged others to show respect too. And at one point she said to you, respect the sacrifices made for you. What did that mean to you as you grew up?
Well, it's interesting that I think some could read that as, I worked hard, so you need to pay attention to what I've done. But she didn't mean it that way alone or only. Obviously she meant that it was important to pay attention to the fact that, she as a single parent worked, her behind off to really, provide for me as only child. My father left us when I was very young. And so she had that entire burden on her, and my grandmother did assist with that as well. But what she meant by respect and sacrifices meant that think back to what society as a whole, the community of people who have done different things to open doors for me and others, what that really means. And so she meant it in every type of setting that you can imagine. Obviously, she meant it in terms of work ethic. She meant it in terms of just ethical behavior generally. She also meant it in terms of political action. The importance of voting was very important to her. And she, we talked many times about the civil rights movement. I was, born during the apex of the civil rights movement, in the 60s. And so, when my mother made that statement, she was definitely talking about I'm going to use the word totality of things that people have done to just try to improve on society. And I think in many ways it was saying, make sure that you make your mark and put yourself in a position to help others and continue, so that other people will have to do the same thing after you.
Yes, and that's a very important point. And one thing I also noticed is, whilst I was reading the book, that in the midst of all this racial injustice, we'll come down to that later, but in the midst of all this racial injustice that she suffered, she also showed respect. You know, she never allowed herself to lose her cool and that kind of thing. So what does that mean to you, David?
Well, I mean, it meant that, you know, she thought it was very important to always, as best you can, respond with grace under pressure. And to your audience, that clearly means not to just succumb to the will of others. What it means is, you know, to fight the fight, know that you can't win every battle, but it's important that you try to win the war of doing what's right as often as possible. You know, and so, you know, I think that you know, she really she walked the walk that she talked in every way. You know, she didn't go out and give presentations and then act a different way in her private life, you know, and so I think that was just a very important thing for the audience to know, that it was very easy for her to do what she did, even though she dealt with many obstacles. It was very easy for her to continue what she was doing because she tried to do the right thing. You know, when people try to do the wrong thing or they're telling lies about everything, you got to keep up with all that. She didn't have to worry about that. Yeah. You know, she just did the right thing as often as possible, tried to smile when people were still coming at her. And at the very end, you know, a lot of times she would get over on them and they didn't even realize it. And so the joke was on them.
Yeah. And that was a very, very important way she handled things, because if you look at what is going on today in our society, in the face of real injustice, it is difficult to show respect to somebody who is like maltreating you, I mean, or being unjust to you. But she really held that ground and she showed some bright examples.
Can I add one more thing to that, though? Your point, she did say many, many times, it's important to understand how to forgive, but it's also important to remember not to forget what people do.
Yeah. That's very important. Thank you very much. Paige, I would also like you to comment on this question. Raye was an avid lover of education.
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain her educational journey to us and how this contributed to your present educational achievements as a professor? I'm asking Dave, but somewhere also, Paige, you can also comment.
Okay. Yeah.
So Dave, can you start with that and then Paige can chime in?
Sure. You know, I mean, it was instilled in my mother from a very early age, you know, education was the key, you know, and obviously she, you know, grew up in a setting where, you know, there was institutional racism that prevented her from being able to pursue certain goals, but also institutionalized gender discrimination, even, you know, to not be able to take certain classes that she wanted to take that the boys would take. And, you know, and Paige and I write about that in the book, you know, and so I think that throughout my mother's life, you know, she emphasized that, you know, you have to not only pursue a formal education as best you can, and carve out what works for you, but also keep in mind it's important to maintain your skills in professional development. And she considered that part of your education as well, and to really have the attitude that you never stop learning. But she definitely believed that, you know, if you don't work hard to try to get the credentials, or at least the knowledge, the education, whether it's formal education or the informal knowledge of how to do something and make it happen, then you're really only, you know, making obstacles for yourself, and in many cases allowing other people's efforts to stop you succeed.
And I will say this, there's something, you know, there's the education that's presented to you in books, which of course she did study and she was a very good student. But there is also this self-directed education where you're exploring and taking different avenues to get to the same place, or you're taking things apart, like the trucks and the toys she used to play with as a child, taking things apart and putting them back together. That's a very educational thing. And then to understand at the age of 7 that when she dropped down into a midget submarine for the first time, a mini submarine,
Yeah.
to understand, wow, this seems to be something that really speaks to me. And then going home to her mother, who said, let's go find out what it takes to become an engineer. And then cobbling together an education by learning math, learning science along the way that ultimately served her as well as the formal engineering degree she was not permitted to get because of her color, as it did other ways. There's something about coming at something from the outside, like not having all that book learning, that makes you able to see things that other people can't see, when it comes to solving a problem. And I think that really served her well.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Let us go back to the state of racial injustice, because that also is a very, very important issue, even in our present day America. We see all the issues that are going on. How did Raye's experiences with racial injustice from Arkansas to Washington, D.C., both in and out of work, help to shape a fight for racial equality? And in addition to that, I want you to compare what you went through in Arkansas and DC. Which one was more severe, in experiences?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Loaded question.
Well, we can take it in beats.
Yeah.
First, let's see how our experiences, from Arkansas to Washington, D.C., both in and out of work, help to shape our fight for racial equality.
Well, let me start now. I know Paige and I are going to really piggyback
Yes.
on obviously. Just look at the facts of the time. It's a segregated South. We're talking the 1950s. My mother graduated college in 1956. That was the year before the Brown versus Board decision to desegregate schools in the United States. So, my mother graduated college before all of that turmoil happened in Little Rock, and there was already turmoil going on in terms of racial injustice, but that was the environment that my mother was in, high school, college, and graduating college literally before the Little Rock 9 happened, right? The year before. And so in 1956, when she graduated college, it was pretty clear to her and other folks that looked like her, especially if you were a woman, that you were going to have limited opportunities here in Arkansas, just like other states, and for many people, that's why a lot of people from Arkansas left, minorities, left once they got their education or without their formal education, and went to different parts of the North and the Midwest. And so my mother immediately planned on getting the heck out. In 1956, as soon as she graduated college, she went immediately to Washington, D.C., because she figured at least she'd have more of a fighting chance to be able to use her business degree, which is what she had to get instead of an engineering degree, because they didn't allow minorities to get an engineering degree in Arkansas at the time, at the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. And so, that was institutionalized, a problem, but she still dealt with the same thing, racially, because the question you're asking right now is about race versus gender. But she still dealt with that in the Washington, D.C. area, because just because the D.C. is in the north, well, technically it's still south of the Mason-Dixon line, but you still had some of the same problems there. It just wasn't institutionalized the same way, and as you know, the military had desegregated earlier than other types of organizations, in America. But she still ran into a lot of racial strife in the DC metropolitan area as well, even first coming to Washington, later on moving into Maryland, being involved in certain activities, and it was clear, and whether it was just in your face that we just don't want you here, or it was just pretty clear informally that you don't belong. That was a common thing. So I think the racial injustices were in both places, right? It was
Yeah.
just a lot more overt in the South at that time. And then paired with the gender, I know you're not asking about that right now, but paired with the gender discrimination, it really posed a lot of problems. And I'll say that the gender discrimination also played a role in stereotypes about what opportunities, even within institutions like the Navy, with her being able to, with people who should be just doing their job and making things work the way it's supposed to work, finding excuses for not allowing what's supposed to happen. So that's kind of a convoluted kind of response, but it impacted work. It impacted personal life too, because, you want to belong to certain groups, certain organizations, you're not invited, all those different types of things, and clearly my mother, and I don't know if it was racial or not, or gender or not, but she was never even invited to see one of her ships that she designed until much later in her career. And it was by happenstance that she got that first opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you see over time how these racist slights and this institutionalized abuse eats away at you over time. I mean, whether your bus driver isn't willing to make change for you, and then you have to go in to get change and he drives off, which makes you wait and possibly miss a class. And you add these things together, like the necessity to hide in your own home when someone comes to knock on the door, the neighbors that you have in one part of town not accepting you as the Black family in the neighborhood. These things build up over time. And I think, yes, she went to DC hoping she would not have it as overtly shoved in her face as it was in Arkansas. But there were some things that were done, maybe subtly, maybe not so subtly, but there were also some people that she met in the DC area that were willing to take a stand on it. They were willing to say, okay, if you're not going to let our friend eat lunch with us in this dining hall, then we're not going to eat here and we're going to cancel our credit cards. So there's nuances to it. From the beginning of her story, even through to the end, when she went back to Arkansas after being away from it for so long. And then, you have this mindset built in that this is the way that Arkansas is going to be. And there's this trepidation about coming in and what are your neighbors going to do? If your neighbors are mostly white, are they going to let me in? Or are they going to accept me? Which, of course, they did accept her in time as well. But there's over time, by the time that she came back to Arkansas, decades of this eats away at you. So you have suspicion and until people prove you wrong, like to prove that it's okay and you're welcome.
Yeah. Yes. About not being accepted in your neighborhood, that is very painful. I don't know if you've seen this movie. I was watching a movie called Them. I think it's a new movie. Yes, Them. I mean, it shows the life of a guy that moved from the South and wanted to find work in California. When he arrived in his neighborhood where he was able to find work, he was not accepted. They gave him a lot of problems in that neighborhood just because he was different. So when I watched that movie and I read what Raye went through, I was really able to visualize. She was really a strong woman who persevered,
But it wasn't easy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it wasn't easy. Yeah. She's really a testimony of perseverance.
Yes,
she really persevered.
Yes, she is.
Let's come to our work life. She was a workaholic. Even when you were 5 years old, David, she had taught you how to code in the beginner's program language BASIC. So she would put you in a corner of the computer room and have you punch up all government cards. Please explain your experiences in living with such a hardworking mother. Even at the age of 5, you could punch all those cards.
Yeah, I mean, I was just joking with Paige the other day. I said, yeah, that was kind of like I was having fun at the playground. Really, her office became the playground because I was getting and you know and for any of your audience out there, obviously my mother didn't put me on any equipment that in such a way that I would cause any harm to any of the expensive equipment. You know, but you know, she figured, well, he's here. You might as well learn how to. Here's a machine that's simple to use for her, and she's like, he can do this. You know, and so that's why she taught me some. He might as well learn now. And of course that led to other things, but I guess, you know, your question is kind of, you know, she was surrounded with technology.
Yeah.
And what was it like to see her in that setting? Well, for me, it was the norm. I didn't realize that it was not the norm, you know, but I'd always grown up seeing her in different types of work facilities, whether they were civilian facilities or military facilities. And that was my experience. And of course, you know, I mentioned before, I was only child. And so she had to bring me a lot of places, you know, and, you know, luckily my grandmother was able to help watch me some too. But I think, you know, I was exposed to seeing her in various settings around different types of technology, some of them small scale, some of them I overheard her, you know, talking about technology and theory and application of things, and really, you know, watched her, you know, with not only the importance of understanding the technical aspects of something, but to be able to network with others and engage in discussion, dialogue about innovation with technology, and literally not just what we can do with it, but why it might be the right thing to do versus just being able to do. You see what I'm saying? And I think those are the right types of decisions that people that have access to groundbreaking things need to do. I think that's real leadership. You know, so I got a chance to watch her in those various types of settings using all different types of computers, as I mentioned. And I had no idea as to the depths of some of the projects that she was involved in with others. And my mother was always very clear not to try to take credit for things that were really joint, you know, projects. You know, she acknowledged that she played a role, and she was very proud and excited about that. I think it's also important for your audience to know that, you know, my mother, even though she grew up with all these odds, growing up in an America that wasn't fair and equal, that she still had a lot of patriotism for, you know, United States. And she really valued the ideals that America was built on, in a sense of opportunity and belief in access for all and opportunity for all, even though it really didn't exist for all. It still does not in many ways. And so she really put a lot of effort, and I'll just use the word heart, her core, into wanting to do the right thing with her opportunity with the Navy to try to protect American citizens. But secondly, protect American citizens, primarily protecting the people who were using technology that she was involved with directly, you know, sailors, Marines, in some cases, you know, Air Force pilots, you know, and other types of folks, you know, Army as well, Special Forces that were on some of the ships, all those different types of things. So I hope I'm answering your question okay, but I think
yes, you are.
yeah,
I'd like to add a little bit. She was
That's
a really hardworking woman who did, you know, change the way the Navy designed and built its ships. But even though she was, as you said, a workaholic, she was still a very engaged mother who, when she came home at night and David had put off asking her to bring cookies in for or make cookies for the next day of school, she would stay up and do it. You know, she would take him to bowling on Saturdays and hang out there, you know, eating pizza, you know, with his grandmother Flossie. You know, so she was an engaged parent whose job may not have looked the same as other parents and whose work hours may not have been the same, but that didn't mean she was all work and no mom. She was definitely a mother who encouraged her son, who at one point when he was struggling at school, she took the time to get him educationally tested, to get him put in a private school that would be good for him and where he thrived. And she had an understanding of it, about that. And that one in specific, specifically spoke to her love and respect for education. She knew she didn't learn the same way as everybody else. And obviously David was not either, which, doesn't mean anything other than you have a different learning style. But she had that kind of empathy for people, that she knew what her son needed and she gave it to him.
Can I add something to it as well? Because
Sure,
I think,
go ahead.
piggyback on what Paige is saying, and I agree obviously with everything she's saying, but I also think that this sense of work ethic and the importance of having a strong work ethic tied into how you might think of a workaholic, in the sense that she bent over backwards to try to get things done. If she committed to a project, she wanted to try her best to get it done, if at all possible. But she wasn't one to want to waste resources or waste time and money that belonged to an organization, because she didn't feel that was fair to an organization. It could be the Navy or whatever organization. And at the same time, that also meant that her work ethic was she didn't have a lot of patience for people that were not willing to put the work in to get the job done. You wanted to half do it, that type of thing. I had no interest in trying to do a good job. So I think workaholic also, and when I think of it, it's not just working a lot, it's also making sure you're trying to do the best job you can with the time you have. And Paige is exactly right. I mean, my mother did, she never brought those things home to me. You know what I mean? Like I never felt like it interfered with her time with me, and she would bring me over to the library, a lot, and with my friend, Larry, who's in the book as well. And I was engaged in lots of other activities. In fact, I went to my scouting meetings right across in some buildings down the street from where you're sitting now at the library in Maryland. And so I went bowling, every Saturday right off of University Boulevard, which is, about a mile or so from where you are now. I think it closed down. But Paige is right. I mean, she was a workaholic, but she was an engaged parent as well.
Yeah, she was able to strike a very good balance. And that was very good. And let's come now to her education. She studied business formally, but amazingly, she ended up being a pioneer in engineering. I mean, that's such a transition in shipbuilding design for the US Navy. Can you take us through that erudite journey from Arkansas to Washington, D.C.? Formal business education, and then a very good naval engineer, designer.
Yeah, she, the business degree was what was available to her.
Yeah.
So she studied that because she also knew that, she had, strong women in her family who were entrepreneurial. And so to learn the nuts and bolts of business, she knew it would be beneficial. So the business degree was what was available to her. But at the same time, all the way through her academic career, from when she was small enough to know that engineering was for her, she took as much math and science along the way, up through college, until she graduated with that business degree because the engineering one wasn't available. And she went to DC. The thing about her is she's this very curious, engaged person who, with a technical mind, who could watch what people were doing with a computer and figure out what they were doing and realize these are the things I need to do to operate this computer. She had a photographic memory. She had a very methodical way. And so she was able to learn by watching so you have a lot of book learning and self-directed learning, but then there's this part where she's learning by watching. She figured out how to use the big UNIVAC. And then once she was promoted, she said, okay, I'm going to put myself into classes where I can learn how to code, where I can learn how to make this computer really do things. And she did that all throughout her career, even if it was, it wasn't necessarily with engineering, it was with how to be a senior level manager. So, and you could see in her papers, there's a lot of articles she used to collect about self-improvement. Like, what do I need to do to inspire people? What do I need to do to develop good habits? What do I need to do with this? Like, she was always looking for that way to develop an edge that would, help her in her day-to-day life.
Okay. David, let's come to your school days. Your mother would drop you off at the Hyattsville library. How much did that contribute to building your relationship with the library?
Well, it's funny because, for years, and I always called it the saucer. I think when you in your email you described it as something else that was, but I always thought it was like a spaceship in front of the library. I thought it was odd, but that's how I loved it, because I always loved science fiction, and for me I was like, I love that library. So I remember I first, in fact, my mother took me there, and I think my grandmother Flossie might have been with me the first few times. And we just kind of explored kind of how the Dewey Decimal System works, and kind of toured around, and, shown children's books. And then, these are books when you get older, you'll probably be more interested in some of these. And I remember doing that a few times. And I remember, learning about microfiche and microfilm, and then checking books out, which I thought was such a, I'll use the word odd, but amazing concept to me, that, hey, I can actually take some of these home, which sounded out, I just couldn't believe it as a child that we could do that. And I always wondered what was kind of this is, again, spending so much time at the Navy and Naval Sea Systems Command and seeing how that organization worked. I was like, how does this, and as an adult, I can use the word infrastructure. I don't know how I thought of it as a kid. How does this work at the library where they're able to actually do this, And now that I know there's like specialty in library science and all those different archival studies, and, that it was way above my head at the time, So I just was amazed by it. I kind of held that as more of a standard for what I was used to, because when I would go to the library at my school, and it was just this room, that was it. In my mind, I was like, I don't want to go there. I want to go back to, because I got to have fun. I got to people watch. I was a junior sociologist in many ways when I go to the library there at Prince George's County, because, I was right down the street from, for those in the audience there, Naval Sea Systems Command, where the Navy, a lot of the Navy activity happened, where my mother worked, was literally at the end of a long block that is right there where the library is. And on the other side of the library is a mall called Prince George's Plaza. And so I spent a lot of time at Prince George's Plaza. I spent a lot of time at the library, and I spent a lot of time at NAVC, Naval Sea Systems Command. So growing up, to answer your question, obviously at some point I would get dropped off at the library, and it was using it as a place to go study. Not all the time, but generally I go like at least on one day on the weekend. I would go maybe twice during the week. Sometimes when we'd have a day, off, and I had something, I could go and play in the neighborhood as long as I was home, but before the, street lights came on. But a lot of times my friend Larry and I would want to go to the library there, and we would just find, short stories, and we kind of explore, and we didn't really have the same exact interests. He started reading more technical manuals and things like that. He ended up becoming a database administrator, systems administrator through the Defense Department. And I was more interested in science fiction and that type of thing. But as I grew even older, like in junior high and high school, you know, I found it as a place to socialize. I'd see people I want to, get to know and things like that, there. So it became an interesting, fun place to be. But there was something special about just being there on my own. And it was just kind of like my spot, and many others, of course. And I like the fact, and I'm not trying to belabor this, but I really like the fact that it could be that for so many people from different walks of life. And I was very appreciative of having, that resource so close to where I lived. I lived about 10, not even 10-minute drive away, right before the DC line. I lived right over near a store that used to be called Memco, that was up the street on Riggs Road, and so it wasn't far at all. And in fact, when in high school, I actually would ride my bike to the library. And then so I kind of stopped going right as I went to college. And I think I may have actually gone once or twice to look up some things while I was in college and home for the holidays, because that was the library. And in fact, it was either there or I go downtown to the Library of Congress in DC, But it was a really good experience for me to have that resource growing up. And I really do think it helped me in many ways to kind of explore who I am now, who I wanted to be, and finding the balance of things that were interesting that I would do work-wise, but also things that I just, would let my mind just kind of relax and just enjoy the things in the world and just, I'm appreciative of the library, the Prince George's County Library, Hyattsville branch.
Thank you very much, David. If you want to tell us one thing about your mother, let's say some of our audience just came on right now and they want to know what's going on. What's the one thing you want us to remember about your mother?
Wow. I would say that I would want people to know my mother really cared about other people. And she really believed in trying to do whatever you can in this world as an individual to leave the world in a better place than when you came in, whatever that is. She didn't really think initially that people were going to be interested in her story as a book. She really didn't, and it wasn't until later on, and that's how Paige and I got together. She realized that. And it was our literary agent after my mother was on Good Morning America in 2017 on the show. And it was after that, she realized that people would be interested in understanding her career, which is something she didn't think people would be generally interested in, but how she overcame all these obstacles. So I think she would want people to know not just that she went through all those obstacles and was able to overcome and do all these things. It's that other people should be inspired to overcome obstacles and find ways to succeed. And as they do succeed, to make sure that they open doors for other people, and that's really what their role should be on this planet.
Did you want to add anything?
She wouldn't take no for an answer. She wouldn't consider a closed door shut. She wouldn't let anybody get in her way. She was not a woman to be denied. But based on, that was one part of her. But another thing, she had a really good way with people. Oh, and it was part of her magic, the way that she could find out about something, just the common ground that we all share is people. She would take the time to listen, to ask questions, to connect. And I think that made her a really special person, like that willingness to sit and listen, because you kind of wonder, this time we're in, how much better the world would be if we all just took a minute to sit and listen and to meet each other halfway too.
This is a very good book. I enjoyed reading it.
Oh, thank you. We're so happy.
Are we expecting a movie about her life? soon?
It has been optioned, which means it's still like, you know, they're trying to see. So it has been optioned by Stanley Weiser. And we believe that he and his fellow co-writer, Tanya Everett, are going to make all kinds of magic happen on the screen. And I just can't wait to see what they do. It
Yeah.
should be real great. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
thank you very much, David and Paige, for doing this program.
Thank you.
I hope our audience have really learned a lot about Raye. Thank you very much.
Thank
you
and
so much for having us.
Oh,
yeah, you're
sorry.
welcome.
And I'm looking forward to visiting the library again soon. I get to see you in person.
You're always welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.